When was the last time you were hyped for a NASCAR Cup Series race at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway? I know for me, it's been a long, long time, but times are a-changin' in the world of stock car racing. And with the most recent announcement, in fact, a string of announcements of drivers that will be participating in solid equipment, I think the NASCAR race at the Brickyard could be legendary. And yes, my prayers were answered. The thing I said after Shane Van Gisbergen won at Chicago on the street circuit, the first time the NASCAR Cup Series had run on a temporary street course, I said, please bring that number 91 Trackhouse car to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And the prayers were answered today. Late this evening in the United States, early in the morning in Australia, it was announced that Trackhouse and Project 91 will be returning with Shane Van Gisbergen behind the controls at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway for what we now call the Verizon 200, but most people will call the Brickyard. And by the way, we're going to talk a little bit about the Brickyard just in general later in this video, because one of the worst kept secrets, despite what my shirt says, I live in Indianapolis, one of the worst kept secrets in town here is that next year and beyond, the Brickyard 400 will return to the Oval. So, it seems as though the road course race at the Brickyard for the NASCAR Cup Series is going out with a bang. Not only do we have Shane Van Gisbergen announced earlier this week, we have Brody Kostecki also from the Supercars Championship. And if you forgot, because it has been a little bit of time, at Le Mans, believe it or not, I was there when they announced this program. Kamui Kobayashi, who, if you are not aware, is one of the most prolific sports car drivers of this era. He also happens to be a higher up in the Toyota LMP1 team, or I guess we now call that Hypercar, the Toyota Hypercar team. Kamui Kobayashi will be driving a third car for 2311. And oh, by the way, just in case that wasn't enough star power, Formula One world champion Jenson Button will be participating. And supposedly Jimmy Johnson will be returning as well. That is a ton of drivers from either who are no longer full-time in NASCAR or from a world completely outside of NASCAR Cup racing coming together and putting together a grid that is just legendary? Let's say that, because I talked about this in my podcast. SRX. Remember the SRX series, which is kind of the spiritual successor to the International Race of Champions, aka IROC, aka one of the happy fuzzy memories for most of us who grew up from the late 70s to the early 1990s. Everybody likes IROC. But SRX kind of recently has turned into like the old IROC, or the kind of end of times IROC, where it was very, very heavy on aging or, current NASCAR Cup Series stars. And ironically enough, the actual NASCAR Cup Series, at least at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, is going to resemble a true IROC grid, much more so than the series that's actually supposed to kind of be an international race of champions. Shane Van Gisbergen, what else can I say that either hasn't already been said by me or been said by anyone else in this sphere? That was one of the most impressive things a lot of us have seen in a NASCAR Cup Series debut. Not many people, I believe there's two currently that have gone 1-for-1 in their NASCAR Cup Series debut, and fewer still, or maybe not fewer still, but so few people have won their very first race in the NASCAR Cup Series. In fact, we had to go back to Johnny Rutherford in a Daytona Duel in 1963 driving for Smokey Yunick to find another driver on this level, on this caliber. And of course, Johnny Rutherford, one of the great IndyCar stars of all time, winning 3 Indianapolis 500s, 2 for McLaren and 1 for Jim Hall with the Chaparrals. And you talk about the Brickyard 400. And that race has been one of the most unique races I think, in motorsports history. Not necessarily because it's been a good race, because let's face it, it hasn't been. But you look at the formation of that race at the exact time that it was formed, it not only legitimized NASCAR in what we used to call the North, a place that was, before before the mid 1990s, was dominated by IndyCar racing. IndyCar racing was, if not in the South, at least in the Midwest, the North, and the East Coast. That was racing to everyone. But when NASCAR came to Indy, that opened up a lot of doors that NASCAR has never seen before. In fact, we could really maybe put that Chicago street race with Shane Van Gisbergen winning it in the same category as opening doors as Jeff Gordon winning that first Brickyard 400. But the Brickyard 400 did so much more for racing, and essentially, filled the coffers of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and allowed them to create their own series called the Indy Racing League, breaking apart open wheel racing in the United States for some 15 years and causing at least another door to open for NASCAR to rise even more, as if racing at Indy alone didn't do that enough. But ironically enough, the year that open wheel racing in this country got its crap together, 2008, was also the year that the Brickyard 400 completely fell apart. The 2008 Brickyard 400, speaking of falling apart, had a lot of tires that were falling apart. And that really hurt that race. In fact, to the point where the attendance was so bad, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway decided to move the race in a fairly unprecedented move to the road course. And if you think about it, that would be like in 31, the Indianapolis 500, the attendance fell off, and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway decided, you know what? Let's build a road course and we'll race on that, and maybe people will come out. The road course race itself has certainly had some chaotic moments. That goes without saying, but it has not, I think, been a success. I think everyone knows that. I don't think that's speaking out of school or out of turn or anything. Now, going back to the Oval, that's going to be a whole separate video. Professor Know-It-All is going to come out and talk about what Indy needs to be and what the Brickyard needs to be successful. But one of the key points of that video that I'm going to make before the Brickyard 400 is very simply put, Indy needs to be special. And one of the things that makes the Indianapolis 500 so special is that major stars are willing to come out of their comfort zone and attempt to race at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway on the oval and beat the best in the world in Indy cars. And to see that tradition move to the Brickyard, where we've got Shane Van Gisbergen there, we've got Jenson Button there, we've got Kamui Kobayashi there, and they're all in legitimately decent equipment that in the right circumstances can win the race. That is what Indianapolis is all about. And that's why I'm so excited about this, because we know Shane Van Gisbergen is going to be extremely tough. We know he's legitimate, and now he's gotten in all the Cup Series drivers' heads. Now, what's going to be different about Indianapolis, almost certainly from Chicago, is that there's going to be double file restarts to contend with. That was one thing that they didn't have to worry about in Chicago. Now, not to say that the supercars drivers don't know how to rough it up, quite the opposite. In fact, they know exactly what rough racing is, and the American style of beating and banging that we're so used to is very much a thing in Australia with our sister Cup or Stock Car Series supercars. But the double file restarts in that turn one, the way that it is at Indianapolis, is going to result in a lot of chaos, a lot of cars going off of the course, a lot of cars getting spun out, a lot of cars bending toe links. Last year, we even saw Kyle Larson presumably completely miss his braking point and cause enormous accidents. So there's a whole lot of things that can go wrong at that first corner at Indianapolis and really the whole way around the track. It's a lot different than a lot of tracks on the supercars calendar. Now, certainly they race at least one grade one track. That's Melbourne in Australia. But I wouldn't necessarily describe that as the kind of Formula One track that Indianapolis is. Indianapolis was definitely built in that super hardcore Herman Tilke era. I don't think Herman Tilke actually designed the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, but it's not that great of a road course. And it's not super bumpy. There's not a lot of character to it. And a lot of tracks in Australia and New Zealand, they have a lot of character. They're very tight. So I wouldn't necessarily, I wouldn't bet against it, by the way. That's not financial advice, but I wouldn't bet against Shane Van Gisbergen or Brody Kostecki or any other of the international stars. But I think this is going to be a much tougher challenge than we've seen at the Chicago race, because that was very much in the wheelhouse of European racing and supercar racing. And this, while it is a European road course with heavy stock cars and 3 years of experience before the supercars guys have gotten here, that's going to level the playing field a bit. And so that's going to be the interesting part of this whole experiment, is going to be to see in a true, kind of actually equal, all things being equal scenario, where Shane probably has the road racing talent to overcome any kind of car deficiency, but the Cup guys are going to have the setup data, they're going to have the track knowledge, and they're not going to fear it quite like they were afraid of, in my opinion, the tight confines and wet surface of Chicago. So it's going to be fun. I'm excited for it. I'm looking forward to it. And I'm also looking forward to talking a little bit more about the future of NASCAR at Indianapolis and the Brickyard 400, but that's another video. At the moment, we get to celebrate because Shane Van Gisbergen is back in the United States, and we get to see if he can continue his 100% win streak. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video, which will be at Cornchella in Iowa.